Iran has targeted the oil fields of 5 countries with its missiles. This is not rhetoric. It is not a diplomatic bluff. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has formalized an expanded list of targets that includes every refinery, every oil pipeline, and every natural gas facility in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. 5 countries, the entire energy backbone of the Persian Gulf. And the American response? At this very moment, on April 25, 2026, B-52H Stratofortresses and B-1 Lancers are taking off from RAF Fairford in England for intensive training missions. British civilian spotters are photographing and reporting a new wave of operations departing from the base. While diplomats exchange words in Islamabad, bombers are updating target lists. This is no coincidence. This is preparation. And the question no one is asking out loud is this: if negotiations fail in the coming days, what exactly will these bombers attack, and what will Iran do in response? Before any analysis, let's establish what is confirmed and what is still in the realm of speculation, using Western sources themselves, because the last thing this channel does is propaganda. The White House has officially confirmed that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are on their way to Islamabad to meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. This is a fact, not a rumor. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, in a public statement, called U.S. operations against Iran a gift to the world and affirmed that the naval blockade off the Iranian coast will continue for as long as necessary. His words. The blockade is being enforced by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and submarines positioned in the waters of the Gulf, conducting ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, tracking unmanned underwater vehicles, and monitoring every movement of Iranian cargo. Independent photographic records collected by spotters in England confirm the increased operations of B-52H and B-1 bombers at RAF Fairford. Hard numbers before any arguments. Iran has already launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles against Gulf infrastructure. Saudi Arabia's east-west oil pipeline was damaged in an attack that alone cut 700,000 barrels per day of export capacity. The liquefied natural gas facility on Das Island in the United Arab Emirates was struck. Facilities in Kuwait and other parts of Saudi Arabia have also come under attack. This is what has already happened. What is being debated now is what comes next. What is in dispute? Whether the talks in Islamabad are direct or conducted through intermediaries. Iran insists there will be no direct contact with Americans. The U.S. says it is an opportunity to hear what Tehran has to say. Someone is lying, or both are managing narratives for their domestic audiences. What is confirmed is that Iran says the Strait of Hormuz remains closed as long as the American blockade exists. And the Pentagon has not publicly explained what the information means that U.S. ammunition stocks are lower than they were before previous operations. Now comes what the mainstream media is not giving proper attention to, and this is where the situation gets really serious. Iran is hiding its ballistic missiles inside mountains, literally. There is a facility called OGAB B-44, also known as Eagle Base, a secret underground IRGC airbase, completely buried within a mountain range. The entrance is a series of bunkers carved directly into the rock. The taxiways are wide enough to accommodate F-14s. There are ammunition depots also buried in the immediate vicinity of the main structure. The base has complete infrastructure, barracks, IRGC headquarters, maintenance facilities, all buried or protected by the terrain's own geology. This base was originally built for fighter jets from the Shah era, F-4 Phantoms and F-14 Tomcats, that the Americans sold to Iran before the 1979 revolution. But Iran no longer has a real air force. What they have today are ballistic missiles and Shahed drones, and all of this is being systematically relocated to structures exactly like OGAB B-44. There is another base right next to it, and there are dozens of similar facilities scattered across Iranian territory, each a hardened target, each accessible from only one angle of attack because the mountain itself blocks the others. This creates a very specific tactical problem for U.S. planning. You cannot simply fly over Iran with heavy bombers as if it were 2003. Iran may have received advanced air defense systems. China has neither confirmed nor denied supplying additional equipment during the conflict. So the B-52s must operate in standoff mode, launching JASMERs, the extended-range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, from hundreds of miles away, without entering Iranian airspace. The B-52H can carry dozens of these missiles on its wings. And the supersonic B-1 Lancer, with its massive payload capacity, can launch 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs designed specifically to penetrate hardened underground structures. That is exactly the type of target that OGAB B-44 represents. It is exactly the type of mission for which these bombers are training now. OGAB B-44 is just one example. Iran has dozens of similar facilities, all housing ballistic missiles, all potentially housing Shahed drones. And as long as these facilities remain intact, Iran retains its capacity for retaliation. That is what creates the precarious balance of the current ceasefire. Not diplomacy, not goodwill, but the existence of hundreds of missiles buried in mountains that the Americans have not yet destroyed. This should come as no surprise to anyone who has studied how modern wars end, or do not end. In Iraq in 2003, the United States destroyed Saddam Hussein's regular army in a matter of weeks. The conventional military structure collapsed rapidly. What did not collapse were the dispersed networks, the hidden arsenals, the command structures that survived the initial bombardment. The official war ended in weeks. The insurgency lasted for years, and was fueled by weapons and infrastructure that no one had managed to locate and destroy during the initial phase of the conflict. In Afghanistan, the Mujahideen learned a lesson from the Soviets in the 1980s that they never forgot. Mountain bunkers are virtually indestructible by conventional bombing. Tora Bora held out. The caves held out. The Americans learned this the hard way, dropping bombs on rocky terrain while the target simply moved deeper into the mountains. Iran watched Iraq. It watched Afghanistan. It watched Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program and his weapons of mass destruction in exchange for diplomatic normalization, and ended up dead in the streets of Sirte in 2011. Iran reached a simple conclusion that has guided its entire military doctrine for at least 2 decades. Those who stay on the surface die, those who go underground survive, and those who surrender their weapons lose the only real protection they have. OGAB B-44 is not a crisis improvisation. It is the result of 20 years of deliberate doctrine, built upon the lessons of conflicts that Iran has closely observed. And the link to the present is clear. The current ceasefire is fragile precisely because the U.S. has not yet destroyed Iran's retaliatory capability. The missiles remain in the mountains. Shahed drones continue to be produced in facilities that may be similarly buried. As long as this exists, Iran has leverage. And Iran knows this exactly. But here is the dimension that virtually no one is discussing, and it is this that will determine whether there will be war or peace in the coming days. There is a war taking place within the Iranian regime itself. Not in the streets, not among the population, within the power apparatus. On one side is Brigadier General Ahmad Vahidi, apparently recently promoted to Major General of the IRGC, a hardliner with no demonstrated willingness to negotiate on terms the U.S. could accept. On the other side is a pragmatic wing that includes Mohammad Ghalib, Iran's former chief negotiator, President Pezeshkian, and Foreign Minister Agharachi. What happened on March 28th is revealing. President Pezeshkian publicly criticized the IRGC's actions in conducting the war. Pezeshkian then explicitly accused Vahidi and the commander of the Khatam Anbaya headquarters of acting unilaterally and deliberately fueling the escalation of the conflict. This is the president of a country publicly accusing his own Revolutionary Guard of sabotaging the chances for peace. It is not something that happens in stable, functional regimes. The outcome of this internal power struggle became clear when the negotiations in Islamabad were organized. Ghalib, the man who wanted to negotiate, the man who had been the chief negotiator, did not go to Islamabad. He is not part of the team. He was essentially removed from the process. The one going to Islamabad is Agharachi, who may have good intentions, but who operates within a regime where Vahidi and the IRGC hardliners appear to have consolidated control over strategic decisions. This means something very specific for the negotiations. Whoever is sitting at the table in Islamabad may not have a real mandate to concede on anything that matters. Vahidi represents a worldview that operates on a simple logic. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And with 10,000 ballistic missiles buried in mountains and hundreds of thousands of Shahed drones potentially at his disposal, Vahidi has a very big hammer. Now connect this to what happens in your daily life, because the conflict in the Persian Gulf doesn't stay in the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Iran explicitly states that it will not open it as long as the U.S. blockade exists. Approximately 1/5 of all oil traded in the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Every day the strait remains closed adds pressure to the price per barrel. And the price per barrel is not a financial abstraction. It translates directly into the price of gasoline, the cost of trucking freight, and the price of food on store shelves. Every global logistics chain that depends on fuel feels this shock. Iran is demanding 700,000 barrels per day from Saudi Arabia just for the damage to the pipeline. Imagine what happens to global markets if the promised attacks against facilities in 5 countries materialize. This isn't distant geopolitics. This is the price you pay at the gas station closest to your home. 3 scenarios for what comes next, and each is more serious than the last. In the first scenario, there is a minimal agreement in Islamabad. Iran partially opens the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for some easing of the U.S. blockade. Neither side truly yields on anything that matters structurally. The ceasefire holds for a few months, but Iran continues to stock its underground missile bunkers. Vahidi further consolidates his internal power. The B-52s return to base, and in 6 or 8 months, we're right back here again, with a bigger problem, with Iran better prepared, and with U.S. ammunition stocks even lower than they are now. In the second scenario, negotiations collapse. Witoff and Kushner return from Islamabad without an agreement. Iran formally announces that any resumption of American attacks will result in immediate strikes against the energy infrastructure of the 5 Gulf countries. The B-52s and B-1s at Fairford are deployed. The first JASMERs cross the airspace toward the IRGC's underground facilities. Iran responds within hours with swarms of Shahed drones and cruise missiles targeting Saudi and Emirati oil fields. The price of oil skyrockets in a single trading session. The global economy feels the shock before the end of the day. And reports that U.S. ammunition stocks are lower than before raise a question the Pentagon has not answered. How long can the U.S. sustain high-intensity operations without a pause for resupply? In the third scenario, it is the worst-case scenario, and it is what no one wants to say out loud. Vahidi and the IRGC hardliners come to the conclusion that the regime's collapse is a matter of time anyway. With ballistic missiles still in the mountains and a nuclear program that may not have been completely eliminated by previous operations, the window to use what they have is closing. The hammer logic takes over. A large-scale preemptive strike, not against military bases, but against the energy infrastructure of 5 countries simultaneously, with the aim of causing a global economic shock that forces negotiations on different terms. Pete Hegseth said the blockade will continue. Trump said he wants the best deal and called for strategic patience, but warned there will be renewed pressure on the strait if it is not fully opened. No one has explained what happens if Iran decides it prefers a controlled collapse to a slow collapse. We're back to square one. 5 countries with their oil fields on Iran's target list. B-52s training in England. Diplomats in Islamabad unsure whether they have counterparts with a mandate to negotiate. The question that determines everything is simple, and no one can answer it with certainty. Who is really in control in Tehran? If it's OGAB and the pragmatists, there's a real chance of an agreement. If it's Vahidi, the man promoted as Iranian generals have increasingly shorter shelf lives, then Islamabad isn't negotiation, it's theater. And the B-52s aren't training for nothing. We'll be tracking every move of this every day, because what happens in the next 72 hours could change the price of what you put in your gas tank, and it could change much more than that. If you want to understand every development in this crisis before the mainstream media decides it's important to cover, sign up now. Because when those bombers actually take off from England, you'll want to already understand why.